Good evening. Welcome. My name is Doreen Riley. I'm Vice President for Advancement at John Carroll, and I'm so happy to be here tonight and to welcome a very famous alum. He'll be famous after tonight. So this is part of our Alumni Spotlight series. We started it about a year ago, so this is about the sixth one that we've done. And we are more than happy to welcome and highlight some of our alums as part of how they live their life after they leave John Carroll, how they approach their career, how they approach their work. And we are so happy to welcome a graduate from the class of 1980, Jim Moses. So he is Vice President of Operations for the largest hub for American Airlines in the world, so Dallas-Fort Worth. Before that, he ran operations in Philadelphia, which included the Northeast Corridor, so Boston, New York, LaGuardia, JFK. I'm probably forgetting one. Close enough. And then before that, he ran operations for Los Angeles, LAX. So he is in charge of 16,000 employees, 900 daily flights out of Dallas-Fort Worth. He's in charge of the people, the planes, the operations. And we are so happy to have him share his thoughts on the future of aviation and how his Carroll Blue Streak experience has shaped his life. So give a warm welcome to Jim Moses.
Thank you very much. You could hear me now? It's okay. No, thank you very much, Doreen. Really, and it is an absolute pleasure to be back at John Carroll. It's been quite a few years since I've been back here, but as I just walked across the quad, I used to live at Dolan Hall, and walking over here in the cold wind, I had actually a flashback to those, I guess, fall and winter nights here walking across. But, it really is a pleasure to be here. And I'd love this to be more interactive. I've got a few slides kind of to shape our conversation. And the slides are really meant to, highlight some of what I wanted to draw attention to as we talk about the future of air travel. And certainly my perspective, I'd love to hear your perspective on it too. But also, just, as we talk about the future, I think it's going to be only important to talk a little bit about the past and sort of where the industry's been, right? And then what's to come. So as we kind of chat today, I'd like to talk a bit about the pandemic, how it's impacted the industry, not only the airline industry, but hotels, right? Tourism, right? And then we'll talk a bit about sort of this recovery period we're in, some of the challenges we're struggling with, probably like a lot of industries right now, and then talk more about what's to come, the future. We'll talk about fleet modernization, why that's so important, some airport construction, what the future airports are going to look like, touchless technology, ease of travel, and sustainability. But as Doreen mentioned, I left John Carroll in, I guess it was May of 1980, and graduated from the business school, and graduated, I had a marketing degree. And just a little bit about me and my journey before we get started, because my journey may be like many of the journeys or thoughts you're all thinking about now, or sort of that what's to come. So in May, I think that's Father Birkenhauer, I graduated on the left on one sunny May afternoon out here on the quad. And I was all set to go to work for Procter & Gamble, which is the company I really wanted to work for, leaving John Carroll. And they were here recruiting. I was offered a job. I was so excited because I was the only person that year that got offered a job with P&G, a great marketing company. And then I decided in the 11th hour that I would go to work for American Airlines as a flight attendant. And so, to the dismay of my family that helped me through college, I had to have that really difficult conversation. But I was helped through that conversation by my counselor here, the late Casey Bucala, who helped me come to grips with you're 21 years old. If you want to do this, go do it now and enjoy life too. But I'm like, I can't. I've got the job I want with Procter & Gamble. Well, needless to say, I backed out as eloquently as a 21-year-old could back out of a job. I did that, and then the day I graduated, that evening, was on a plane to Dallas to go to work for American Airlines, where the top right, you'll see I became a flight attendant for a few years. And fast forward to today, because I don't want to talk a lot about me, because I want to talk more about the industry, but this may help shape our conversation a bit. And some of what you all sometimes think about as you're getting ready to leave John Carroll. You know, I moved around through the company. I was going to do this for maybe 2 years and then leave American and go. At the time, I thought I'd go get a real job then. But fast forward, I'm still with American. And I decided to go learn all I can about the industry and diversify my background. And, you know, if anybody would have told me back then that I would have the privilege of leading American's largest operation in Dallas-Fort Worth, I probably would have thought they were crazy. But I wasn't afraid to take on new challenges, took some risk, took some opportunities at times right after 9/11 when no one wanted to go to work in New York, but I raised my hand to go. And it opened up more opportunities for me. And so while I wasn't reckless with my career, I built relationships and had mentors and still to this day have them. And now I'm in what I consider sort of the best airport job or airline job in the industry. You know, I have an opportunity to lead, as Doreen said, 16,000 team members through some difficult times. But we're on the back end of that now. I think the future is very bright. I probably shouldn't jump ahead to the future of the industry yet. But I'm incredibly fortunate. And I owe so much of that to John Carroll. Because John Carroll helped form me as a leader. They helped develop me as a leader. And I wasn't the smartest one in the class. But what John Carroll taught me are skills that till today I still call upon. So just a few sort of slides to kind of frame up what's going on in the industry, right? In 2020, the travel sector really impacted, right? I mean, when you think about the fact that overall corporate profitability in 2020 was flat, but the travel industry, and you can see up here, airlines, hotels, really didn't have a good year. We suffered tremendously when your business is literally shut down. When there was no demand for the product you're selling. There were times in airports, there were more employees than customers. And that was how 2020, certainly March of 2020 started, and certainly what we went through throughout the year. Oh, I forgot to mention, I am absolutely fine if you want to interrupt me and just ask a question. I would love this to be more of a conversation. So just, either yell out or raise your hand. And if there's something I'm talking about that you'd like some more clarity on, or you just have a question. So I'm good with that. But as you can see, even Disney, Disney was, back in March, like March 15th of 2020, I remember saying the day Disney shuts down, that's a real sign that we're in trouble. And then Disney shut down. I'm like, okay, that's a sign. If people aren't going to Disney anymore, things are bad. And it was bad, right? And, it was definitely a difficult year. And coming out of that now, I was sharing with some folks about an hour ago, we actually didn't do too bad in the third quarter. Now, didn't do too bad. We still lost $641 million in the third quarter of 21. But compared to the, 2.8 billion we lost in the third quarter of 2020, we're coming out of it, right? So we are seeing We're seeing a tremendous return to travel. Demand has picked up, which is good. We pulled out a lot of expenses from the airline, like most companies have done during the pandemic. And we are, I truly believe, on the backside of this now. And so what's that recovery timeline? Because this will start to set up the future, right? So how is the industry recovering? Well, I'd say that domestic leisure and short-haul international flying has pretty much recovered. And those domestic leisure destinations, people are going to the beaches and skiing. Those are the big travel spots. And even, as we were, coming out of last fall even, it was all about ski destinations and the beach. And so that has been part of what we're seeing recover, right? And in 2019, domestic leisure made up about 45% of our business or our revenues. As I mentioned, short-haul international. Now, domestic business, here's the tricky part, right? Business travel, generally, business travelers, corporate accounts are paying more for their travel than domestic leisure customers. Domestic leisure, predominantly very price sensitive. We want those business customers back, right? So what's going to get them back are travel restrictions, because through the pandemic, corporations, they didn't want to be held liable for sending their people out on trips and have something happen. So corporate travel pretty much dried up. It's starting to come back. And 2022, we are really hearing from a lot of big corporate accounts that travel will begin again. So that's encouraging. And long-haul international, and these are those trips coming from, obviously, overseas, right? So that just really opened up for us on November 8th. And when I say opened up, US citizens could travel more freely, but as of November 8th, people from, for example, the Schengen region, right, could now come into the US if they're vaccinated and tested. And so we have seen, since November 8th, a tremendous increase in demand across the North Atlantic. So there's a lot of pent-up demand for people that have wanted to visit friends and relatives, in the US. So that's promising. That in 2019 made up about 20% of our overall revenues. International travel, this is all airlines, right? So international travel, and you could see here in March of 2020, when I talked about there was no demand for the product you're selling, that's very humbling, right? So there literally, demand for travel, international travel, was zero. Nothing. I remember at the time I was working in Philadelphia, and remember just seeing planes, leave to go get Americans in Europe. We were sending planes across the Atlantic just to bring people back. And no one was buying tickets other than trying to get people back into the US. But it is starting to increase now, right? So we're still 52% below 2019 levels, but demand is definitely now on the increase. Some of yes, please, John.
Back to the business travel.
Yes.
You think it's going to get back to the level it was? Now corporations have found Zoom with consulting firms. They don't necessarily have to be on site. They can't be. So how do you project that to the next, say, 5 years?
That's a great question. We absolutely believe that there is a demand for both, right? That there will always be. We have found this new phenomenon in meeting with people at all times, right? Through Zoom, and while they've always been there, it has been how we've kept the world together between Zoom and Teams over the last 18 to 20 months. But we do believe that we are going to coexist with Zoom as we head into 2022. We do believe that there is a demand for meeting with people in person. And we're hearing that. We're hearing it from corporations, not all, but that there will be travel again to bring people together. And we do believe that we will be back to 2019 levels, 22, 23, but there, if everything stays on course, because we're learning now to exist, to operate in the pandemic, right? From the days of shutting everything down to today, we're masking on airplanes still. More people getting vaccinated. And so we do believe, though, it's a great question because it's something that we've all wrestled with over the last year. But we do believe that we will coexist with, Zoom and Teams, and there will be a demand for business travel to return. No, thank you. Couple of challenges, and these are challenges that we are struggling through every day, right? I think a lot of companies are. Staffing levels. Some of you may have heard about some, airline, sort of situations, disruptions that were a result of lack of staff, right? And while there are people, we are still able to attract people to the airline industry. It's been a tough environment. People that work on airplanes and work in airports, they tell me they're exhausted. It's exhausting. They feel like they're almost under attack with rage on board airplanes, with team members in airports being slapped and punched and spit on. It's horrible. And so we've had people rethink their career path. And so staffing has been something that we're all struggling with. We're able to attract people, and I'm happy to say that, the airport I'm responsible for, we're staffed up. We're actually staffing about 105% of where we would normally want to be. So we are adding staff. We're also adding incentives to get people to come to work. And so maybe some of you have heard about these incentives because there have been a few airlines that have been talking about them. How do we ensure people are going to come to work during the busiest times of year? And so for some of our ground teams, we're paying them an extra $1,000 on, if they show up to work between November 15th and January 2nd. So we're actually incentivizing people now to not call out sick, right? And we're doing similar with our flight attendants, although it's a different type of pay structure. And we believe it's working. And we only have a few days under our belt with it, but people are coming into work. And so this is a bit of how we're not only addressing, making sure we're hiring enough people, but ensuring that those that are working for us are coming to work. Yes?
So you have 105% of your staff needed that you normally have, and you don't need to actively recruit. What are you doing in terms of actively retaining that 105% people?
That's a great question too. So when I say we have 105, we're about 5% over what our staffing models would call for in the airport. We are not stopping hiring because the turnover has been, especially with folks just coming into the workforce, is at levels, we haven't really seen, right? So there's more turnover than we've seen. We also have more people that are accepting jobs, like frontline, new hire, entry-level positions that don't show up. So we saw a lot of that over the summer where people would go to the interview, get hired, and we had a no-show rate at 20 to 25%, which is pretty high. But we're doing things to incentivize people to work, like what I just described, right? To say, if you work these 6 weeks, we'll give you another $1,000. For coming to work. Some of our business partners or people that provide services to airlines, such as fuelers or people that put fuel on planes or people that clean the airplanes, those are not our own employees, but we're working with them. They're incentivizing their workers through special weekend pay to show up on weekends and don't, call out over the weekends. So we're working with them, really through the holiday period. Started last weekend to make sure they are incentivizing their people with things like giveaways, like TVs and gift cards, and double and sometimes triple pay to come to work. So imagine the environment we're in now where everybody's raised the starting rates where we can outside of collective bargaining agreements, and then incentivizing those to actually show up to work. So what we're having to do now to get people to work, it's a little different, and it makes me often think, where does it end? But
How does that affect what we're paying for an airline ticket?
well, I'm often asked this by my friends, why are airline tickets, they're starting to go up, right? And but I said, well, when you look at the cost of air travel, it's actually less than it's been for decades, right? And so I think within what I'll talk about in a second is some of the flexibility we have now in travel that we didn't have before. And so like anything, airfares are, a result of, supply and demand, right? Back in March and April of 2020, where there were very few people on airplanes, people were buying, airplane flights they were pretty inexpensive. And so I believe you're starting to see the market start to stabilize a bit. I don't think airfares are not going to go up because of, we're competing today, right? So with, we're trying to attract a very price-sensitive customer. When I talked about leisure travel and short-haul international travel, leisure travelers are generally price-sensitive. And so we have to be very careful on how we price our product, or Spirit and Frontier. And so our product has to be, in line with everyone else, or no one would buy, right? So, yes, Nicole, right?
I remember earlier this year when we were talking about the salary and how the flights are being canceled constantly and people are getting those fairly accepted. But I was wondering how you guys were kind of fixing the brand a bit to make customers be able to rely on you all of that.
Yeah. That's a great question. So what are we doing to fix the brand image? So what we've done, I just talked a little bit about it, Nicole, right? This whole, investing in our people to incentivize them to come to work is almost like that insurance policy, because what we do to our brand when we cancel flights in large numbers because if we didn't have enough people, and the slightest disruption, right? So we had a difficult time Halloween weekend. That started, actually, and I know people don't think it's true, it actually started with these really bad windstorms in Dallas that shut down most of our runways, and planes couldn't land. And so it forced us into a situation where planes were diverting, and it was a difficult operation. And so we feel that if we, incentivize our people and invest in our people to come to work, and they actually, which we're really pleased that they are coming to work, that it will actually, help us protect our brand. Because if we didn't have a good Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year holiday travel period, it could be damaging to our brand. And so we're pretty confident that the programs we've now put in place are going to help us and almost, act as this insurance policy, to help us make sure and give the money to our employees versus paying for disruption. Okay. Hi.
You get you off of staffing and bonuses and vaccines.
Okay.
What about branding? What kind of movement is American seeing with green initiatives, either fuel or increased efficiency? Google is starting to publicize pretty prominently this flight is 14% less emissions and so forth. And then one more time with the airline bullet planes, smaller and clearer, fuel efficient.
Yes. It's, if you'll bear with me, I've got 2 slides I'm going to talk about sustainability. And, so if you'll just hold that, but let me, just this week, actually the reason I pull this is because the press release, it just was announced less than 48 hours ago. We were the only passenger airline that was just named to be included in the Dow Jones Sustainability North American Index. The recognition is actually a testament to the airline's ongoing commitment to excellence on matters of environmental, social, and governance, including reducing carbon emissions from its operation, advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and providing regular and transparent ESG disclosure. So we're the only passenger airline on. We bumped off another passenger airline. I won't mention the name. But we're really proud of that. It was just announced this week, so your question is really timely. It was perfect. And I didn't ask for that setup either. Yes?
I don't know if you answer this question, but does GE's conglomerate splitting into 3 divisions affect your industry now, or we foresee it affecting your industry?
We don't foresee it, right? But we do have GE engines, right? So I think a lot remains to be seen, because we do, in addition to Rolls-Royce, we do have some GE engines too. Okay, and vaccines, I think I'm just going to really touch on this and not spend a lot of time on vaccines. Obviously, we are impacted by the vaccine mandate, not because we're a company over 100 people, and but because we're a government contractor. So like Delta and United and Southwest, we fall under the government contractor parameters. So by January 4th, every employee, no matter which role they have, needs to be vaccinated or have an exemption, either medical or religious. So something I think a lot of industries, a lot of companies are struggling with today. But I just wanted to call that out as sort of one of those headwinds that's out there with staffing that we continue to spend a lot of time on and work through. So what's to come? As we look to the future, we started making these changes back in March of 2020. And we realized that back then that we were heading into a crisis, right? Not knowing back then how great of a crisis, but knowing back then that we were going to use this opportunity of this pandemic to help modernize our fleet and retire fuel efficient airplanes that we would have been retiring over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And so we started that. And back in 2020, we did some permanent retirements of some of our Embraer 190, so smaller mainline aircraft. We retired 34 Boeing 757s. We actually sold 17 767s to Amazon. And so they took out the seats, flying around cargo, packages. Some Airbus equipment, we retired. Some more regional jets were retired. But the retirements really, it helped us remove operational complexity. And so to the question on sustainability, and you'll see I'm going to tie some of this together, because this is going to allow us is to have a more fuel-efficient fleet. So the fleet that remained, right, some of our more fuel-efficient airplanes. So it also is going to allow us, really to save on a lot of maintenance costs and crew costs. So we took the risk, we streamlined our fleet. To today, we're flying, in our narrow-body fleet, it's Boeing 737s and the Airbus A320 fleet. And the wide bodies are now 787s and 777 aircraft by Boeing, right? And American's fleet today, we have the youngest overall fleet, right? So 57% of our aircraft, of our fleet, are 10 years or younger. And so we use this pandemic to help make these changes and didn't wait. And so we said, we're going to retire airplanes early. And we did that. So our future fleet replacement needs are less than our competitors. We invested in this. We started this process well before the pandemic, and our financing were at very attractive rates. So we did this. You'll often hear about Americans' debt. Here's part of the reason, but we're ahead of our competitors with modernizing our fleet. So one of the decisions we made back in March of 2020, and I think the fact that our airplanes now are, when I look at our big competitors, under 10 years, Americans at 57%, Delta's at 41% of their fleet, and United at 30%. And 20 plus years, and 20 years for an airplane is not actually that old, right? People fly around airplanes much longer than that. But we have less than anyone else at 22% of our fleet versus United at 37%. So another way that we are working on the future, more fuel-efficient airplanes. So airports also need to be modernized, right? You're hearing a lot now about sort of the infrastructure plan, how it's going to impact airports. And a lot of the airports that airlines operate in today are in need of work, right? We have a big investment going on in Dallas-Fort Worth, a $3.5, close to $4 billion investment to modernize one of our main terminal, right? Chicago, an $8.5 billion investment to modernize O'Hare. JFK, $13 billion in investment that'll be made to modernize JFK. And LAX, over $14 billion. Now, this is not all Americans' funds. These are obviously, but what I wanted to just draw attention to is the future of travel, right? We're talking about the future and how we're going to focus on the future, and we've got to modernize the overall experience. Let me talk a little bit about just the Dallas-Fort Worth situation. Yes, John?
Who's funding all this?
It depends, right? So either private bond, cities raise money through bonds to fund most of them, through what we call takeoff and landing fees, so like fees that airlines pay airports to operate. So it's generally, depending upon the location, the way they're funded, could be different, okay? But what I wanted to just to touch on is the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And I have a quick video to show you. We're doing something that has never been done at an airport, and that's constructing part of the airport off the airport in modules. And it's being constructed like sort of on the other side of the airport to not interfere with traffic today. And it's allowing us to take about 7 months off of construction timeline and allow us to use these gates sooner to generate revenue. And it's really pretty fascinating in that this is the first airport to do this. So I have a quick, just a few, you'll see this being constructed and then moved. So the first time this has been done at an airport, and we would move those modules, they were moved overnight. So obviously not in the middle of the day, but they were moved through the night in parts, right? So Terminal C at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, there's one end of it now, the gates that start like at C31, that the modules are in place. We've shaved off about 7 months of construction, put them in place, so they'll be ready to operate next summer. And it's, as I said, it's the first time that any airport has done this, and there are additional parts of the airport construction that will be done like this too. So what would normally have taken us a heck of a lot longer to build, we've done this, we've just recently did this at Dallas-Fort Worth. So it's pretty exciting and a pretty revolutionary way to, sort of save time at an airport, which is really, really disruptive when you have construction at an airport. So a little bit about the future, right? And maybe some of you have already experienced sort of that touchless technology, and we were talking about the overall future of travel, right? It's about the touchless experience. And, I think from the days of having paper tickets, and now to customers being able to walk up to a kiosk and scan their boarding pass and have a bag tag presented to them to put on their own bag, that's where, sort of the future of that check-in process, right? Where, it's touchless. There's less people touching, the bag tags and handing you back your bag tags or your boarding pass, right? So that's what we're, as I said, we have gone pretty much touchless with our kiosk environment where you scan your boarding pass. Elimination of change fees. I think this is one of those, for customers, those great enhancements from the pandemic. Remember, there was a time where every time you would change a ticket, right, there was a fee. And I would hear all the time, I would hear frequently from customers that the fees were almost more than the ticket. Well, through the pandemic, we've eliminated so many of those fees now, right? So providing that more ease of travel, right? We've introduced that same-day standby option, which we used to have, we got rid of, and now it's back. As I mentioned, there are more self-service options via the app. Yes?
So, since you guys eliminated the change fees, I'm pretty sure what you guys are finding out that it's called a flexible fare, right?
Yes.
Because we were, last time we were going to that, and we originally had some flights that we were going to change. We had some credit, we were going to switch our flight, but then all the flexible fare tickets were they were outrageously.
Were they more? Yeah, they cost more.
So like usually you'd see an overseas flight round shipping between $500 and $800, they were close to $2,000.
Right, so the fares, some of the flex fares are higher, right? But provide you that opportunity to change your flight as frequently as you want, right? And I think that's part of what we had talked about moments ago, of that ability to provide flexibility, remaining competitive, but eliminating those change fees that hit every ticket in the past, right? To giving customers the option to make those decisions and to select what's best for them. So I think coming out of the pandemic, I think this has actually been one of the more positive things we've heard about from customers. We don't want to pay change fees on everything we purchase, right? Because people need flexibility in their travel. People were, as you probably have heard, people during the pandemic, people were changing because people didn't know when they were going to travel, right? People would buy tickets and change them frequently. So hopefully this is helping. We've had good comments about flex fares and also the ability to change. So hopefully that continues. So I wanted to talk a little bit about these partnerships just briefly. And, people often ask, well, why am I flying on American or am I flying on this other airline, but I bought my ticket through American? And what does that mean? So in this world we're in today, we can't serve every market. It would be physically impossible to be competitive in every market. So we are now creating these partnerships in various parts of the world. So we just announced a new codeshare agreement with Indigo, which is India's leading airline. We just started service to Delhi. We'll start service to Bangalore. We needed a partner that could allow customers to connect on an American flight onto one of these airlines, right? So they're supporting us, so you'll be able to buy a flight on an American ticket right through to other cities within India. We recently signed a letter of intent with JetSmart and GOL to increase our presence in South America. And we continued to implement the Northeast Alliance, which is our alliance with JetBlue in the Northeast, which has allowed us, with our partnership with JetBlue, to be competitive in a really, really important part of the country. And we were having difficulty, our size, right? We just weren't big enough in New York. And JetBlue was struggling too. And so we said, well, we would form this partnership and provide more benefits to consumers through more flights. And we've continued to add flights now in New York as part of the Northeast Alliance. Now, what's tricky about this one is we'll compete vigorously with JetBlue in other parts of the country. In Florida, we compete with them vigorously. But in New York and Boston, we're partners. So it's, it's a relationship that, was created in the Northeast to allow us to both compete with some of our bigger competitors in the Northeast and ultimately help consumers. And that's what we're showing as part of what's happening as part of the Northeast Alliance, or the NEA. Let me talk a little bit about sustainability. So it was, and so we became an anchor part of Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, right? We are very committed to our sustainability efforts, not only with American, but part of the whole One World Alliance, right? And so what our goals are, right? The One World Alliance, and we all are part of, most of the big carriers are part of an alliance. But the One World carriers have committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. That's what we're working towards. And as I shared a moment ago, we're really very proud to be the only passenger airline just recently recognized on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So we're very, very committed to reducing carbon emissions, lead the industry on its path to decarbonization. That's our effort, and that's what we're focused on. We have a lot of work to do, but we are starting on those efforts, not only as American, but also with our alliance partners. We're also investing in sustainable aviation fuel, right? Sustainable aviation fuel, part of our initiatives. Fleet renewal, I talked a little bit about our fleet. Even though we've got the most modern fleet, we also have to replace airplanes in the future. And so as we focus on fleet renewal, it's about on more fuel efficient airplanes. We're conserving fuel in our operations every day. Each day I get a report of how much, when you run an airplane, it's called APU, auxiliary power unit, at a gate, you burn fuel. We have efforts underway to eliminate those by purchasing enough ground power units and having strong enough ground power units to keep airplanes cool or warm, depending upon the season, while they're sitting at a gate and not running and burning fuel. So a lot of efforts underway in this space. And again, the timing was great that I was able to share of the award we just got this week. So those were the slides. I'd love to have some conversation and open up for questions. But just anyway, happiness is looking down on your next destination from your plane window through sustainability efforts, right? So yes, hi. I'm sorry?
The hub and spoke model of DFW, obviously 900 flights a day. I mean, that's a risk estimate given weather or things like that. Is there like future endeavors for American Airlines to like maybe diversify some of that, or kind of continue to grow DFW?
Well, we believe that running a hub and spoke model actually helps us in irregular operation environments. We're doing a lot of testing now in DFW as to how can we improve upon operations and not be so disruptive. And some of what we're testing now in a hub and spoke model, we would have environments where you'd have an airplane arrive, the flight attendants would go in one direction to another flight, the pilots would go somewhere else, and the plane would go somewhere else. And back on October 5th, we embarked upon this test, which is a relatively costly test because you have to keeping our crew members together on 80% of the flights through DFW. And it's proven to be, we've had some early success. And while it's not even 2 months the test we're into, but it's sort of indicative of some of what we're trying to do to help keep an airline intact, right, during weather events or some type of a regular operation event, when we would have, customers waiting at a gate and you're missing flight attendants or you're missing pilots. And so we continue to look at various models and various testing of how we could strengthen this. Because DFW today is our largest hub, and it'll be around close to 865 to 900 flights. Over the course, when this construction is finished, DFW will be up at about 1,146 flights a day, which will, I don't want to say it's going to be the largest in the world, but it'll be really close if not. So, we have to continue to look for those opportunities, but we do believe that a hub and spoke system, it's certainly part of our model, part of our business model, and part of how we operate the airline, but does allow us to keep things more intact when not. Hi.
This is a little bit off the subject, but what do you see as the future of TSA and how effective?
Well,
because it is such a pain.
TSA, a pain. Okay. Well, they're not going to go away, but the future of screening will definitely evolve and change, right? And, the TSA, through efforts like PreCheck, right, where they're, have more frequent customers, don't have to go through a lot of the screening, but the future of screening will change over the course. As we talk about the future of air travel, the future of how customers come into an airplane will change. There will be a time where you will just literally walk through like an area and you will be screened like a wave, right? Where you won't have to stop and, put everything onto a belt. A belt, not your belt, right? But, so there'll be the future airport is an environment where people just walk through and are screened without queuing up the way we do today. And the TSA has been very active in, sort of helping to develop the future of airport screening. I wish screening, obviously we would wish we lived in a world where that didn't even have to take place, but unfortunately we don't. But, it's part of that overall experience, future, and I think the future of that part of the travel journey will be streamlined in the future, coming years. Yes?
Thanks for your presentation. So a question about you.
Yeah.
So you worked at American for 41 years, approximately by my math, right? A lot of the that makes you really unique because I virtually don't know one that has worked at the same company for 15 years.
Right.
Let alone
Right.
1,000.
Right.
So my question for you is, have you seen that as any sort of liability? Have you supplemented that with other types of learning? What kind of advice would you give people entering into the career now in terms of how long to stay?
Okay. So let me give you a qualifier to like the number of years I've been in the industry. So the part I didn't tell you about my career is there was a period right after I started with American that the industry, aviation, went through a PATCO strike. Some of you may remember that there was this strike where at the time President Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers. And so 2 months after I said no to, remember that part of the story? I said no to Procter & Gamble and I went to American Airlines, I was laid off. And so I went to work for a charter, another airline, for 2.5 years, and then came back to American. But I've been with American, it'll be coming up on, actually my time with American is coming up on 39 years, right? A long time. And certainly a long time as I spend a lot of time working with, developing leaders and new leaders at American. And people have a hard time sometimes thinking, gosh, how could you stay at the same place that long, right? But what I did is kept diversifying my background, right? So I kept it interesting, right? I have worked in just about every area that interacts with customers, from being responsible for our lounge network around the world, to working on airplanes, to working in airports, to working below the wing or on the ramp area to learn that. And have led Americans' hubs in Boston and Los Angeles and Philadelphia and the Northeast and now Dallas-Fort Worth. And I've always thought that the day that I'm not excited to get up and go to work anymore, I would change jobs. And even today, after all those years, I get completely energized with what I get to do. I feel so incredibly fortunate that I'm in this fascinating industry that's frustrating at times, that can't seem to get on a steady path of profitability, that always gets these curveballs thrown at them. I thought 9/11 was a horrific, 2 of our airplanes used in those horrific attacks. Not even knowing if there would be another, and this airline would survive. But it did. And then through mergers and bankruptcies, and it did. And so it's something that, when I've thought about, and I almost left once, but to go to another airline, but then realized that if I'm going to go to another airline, I'm already working at the airline I really want to work at, and I didn't leave. But I think it's very different from what people coming into the workforce today think about, right? But I've been really, as I said, fortunate in the fact that I've been given opportunities, but not opportunities that, I earned on my own. I believed in building relationships and having mentors in my life that have really helped me along my journey. And it's probably why I stuck around so long. And I now feel like I have the ultimate, as I started, the ultimate airport job, probably in the world. And, so I stuck around a long time, but it's always been, in these environments where we're having to really continue to recreate our business model. The airline that I joined many, many years ago doesn't even exist anymore. The way customers traveled many years ago doesn't even exist anymore. And our product offerings have had to continue to evolve. So we stay relevant to many of you in the room. And that's, I think, what has kept me doing what I'm doing for as long as I've been doing it. Yeah. Any other questions? Wow. Thank you. No, it's actually, this has been a pleasure. And, it's my first time back in John Carroll in about 25 years. And it's great to come back. I'm not going to wait another, gosh, I don't even know if I'd be around another 25. But it's been a pleasure. You've been absolutely great. If I can answer any other questions, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or just come in. I'll give you my number or my email address. But if there are questions I could answer either on the airline industry or answer just as going to school and what you may be facing coming out, because the environment's very different today, right? But I hope in some way I can help give back to this time this evening, help shed a little light on what's coming in the airline industry and what's to come. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.